Hey guys, Mr. Kennedy back with another video, and this one's going to be dealing with circulation. Now, when we talk about circulation, there are three main parts of the circulatory system. There's the circulatory fluid, which is usually blood, especially in humans. There's the interconnecting vessels, which are your blood vessels, your capillaries, your veins, and your arteries. And then you have your muscular pump of some sort, which is a heart. Now, when we talk about circulatory system, there's basically two types. There's an open circulatory system and a closed. Open circulatory system is found in a lot of invertebrates, and there's no separation between the blood and interstitial fluid. You basically have a heart pumping, and you have the blood and everything mixing together. I kind of think of it kind of like if you had a 5-gallon bucket full of blood, and you had a heart in there, and it was just pumping through. It's very inefficient because you got a mixture of all this oxygenated, deoxygenated blood. You got the interstitial fluid in it. I mean, it's very inefficient. Closed circulatory system are what some invertebrates have and what vertebrates have, especially us. There's a separation between the blood and the interstitial fluid. It's a lot more efficient. You have blood vessels that separate it. You know, earthworms have it. That's the picture down here at the bottom. Yeah, but the closed circulatory system means it's a closed path, and you don't have an exchange between the blood and the interstitial fluid. Now, when we look at the vertebrate circulatory system in particular, there are different circulatory systems depending on the chambers of heart that an organism has. The two-chambered heart, such as in fish, it has a single blood flow. As you can see down here in the left-hand corner, how it only goes in one path. It's a circle, right? It's very simple. You have a single blood flow chart here. Then you have a three-chambered heart, which are found in amphibians, which has two blood flow areas, one to usually the lungs or the skin, and one to the entire body. Three-chambered hearts are not very efficient because they're low in oxygen because you have two atria sitting up on top and a ventricle on the bottom of the heart. And this ventricle actually has, since it only has one, you have a fusion of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood here, so you don't have as high oxygen content as you possibly could. Four-chambered heart, of course, like mammals, us, you have this double circulation. You have a separation of the low oxygen from the high oxygen because we have two atria and two ventricles. The right side of our heart, the atria and the ventricle, have low oxygen. The left side of our heart, the atria and the ventricle, have high amounts of oxygen. And these are going to be used to carry around the entire body. Okay. Now, when we talk about the evolution of the four-chambered heart, the four-chambered heart is the most efficient, the most effective type of heart there is. We have selected forces that contributed to the four-chambered heart. You had increased body size. A bigger body meant they could have a bigger stomach for herbivores. This protect them against predation. The bigger you are, the less things you have to worry about. You had endothermy, which is, allowed organisms to colonize areas that were uninhabited because they could maintain their internal temperature. And you had flight starting to develop, which allowed these animals to avoid predation but also allowed them to catch a lot of prey. So the four-chambered heart was affected by these forces, and the effect of a four-chambered heart was you had a higher metabolic rate which by having a higher metabolic rate you had a greater need of energy, fuels, oxygen, waste removal, etc. And I just got a stat down here. The endothermic animals needed 10 times more energy and oxygen than ectothermic animals. Now, when we look at the blood vessels of the body, there is a slight difference between arteries and veins. Arteries are going to be a little bit thicker because they have a lot more high pressure than the veins are. The veins actually have valves inside of them that are one-way valves that don't let blood flow back. And then capillaries are the smallest blood vessels, and that's where gas exchange. So now let me explain, kind of walk you through it. Coming out of your heart, you have the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body. And it is very thick-walled because there's a lot of pressure because it's coming right from the heart. From the aorta, you go to the arteries. And the arteries are still thick-walled because there's a lot of pressure. To arterioles, which are smaller arteries, they're still thick-walled. To your capillaries, where gas exchange actually occurs, carbon dioxide and oxygen actually swap places. Some capillaries are only 2 cell layers thick, so it's very efficient for that diffusion to occur. Then you go back up, you go to the venules, which are smaller veins, to the veins, to the superior and inferior vena cava, which are the veins that lead back into the heart. Now, these veins have one-way valves because realize by the time blood gets all the way to the veins, It's moving kind of slow, and this one-way valves keep the blood from going backwards as the heart beats. But you can tell there's going to be a difference in these by the size of the walls because of the pressure that's involved. Now, next we'll talk about a little bit about the heart and its valves. The heart's divided up into 4 chambers. The atria on top, the ventricles are on bottom. You have valves that are between the atria and the ventricle. They're called AV valves, or atrioventricular valves, for the atria and ventricular ventricles. That makes sense. And then you have semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are what separate coming out of the heart from the ventricles to the rest of the heart. You have a semilunar valve that takes the right ventricle as it carries blood to the lungs, and then you have a semilunar valve from the left ventricle, which goes to the aorta. So these are examples of heart valves. Now, next thing I want to mention is sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node is what we call a pacemaker of the heart, and it's found in the right atria, above the right atria, and it actually transmits an electrical signal, and that's what causes the heart to beat, is this electrical signal that is released over and over and over again. And sometimes people's sinoatrial node is not working correctly, and they may need a pacemaker, right? And this is basically what it's taking the place of, is this sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node is just a connection of nerve endings that release an electrical stimulus. Now, as you can think about it, if you think about the heart, and you think about the sinoatrial node in the upper right-hand corner of the heart, then when it releases, the electrical signal goes out. So the atria are going to beat a split second before the ventricles. So you have this boom, 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 which is what we call the lub-dub sound, because the atria contract and then the ventricles, which is kind of good. We're glad they don't both contract at the same time. If they did, blood would shoot out of both ends of the heart, and it'd be very ineffective. There's another atrioventricular node that is on the right ventricle, which whenever it gets hit by the signal from the sinoatrial node, it transmits it again. So it kind of is like that double relay system. Now, this lub-dub sound, the lub is the AV valve shutting, and the dub is the semilunar valve shutting. So you actually hear the valves opening and shutting whenever you put the stethoscope on somebody's heart and listen. Now, sometimes people have what we call a heart murmur, and some of us probably had heart murmurs when we were little because our heart hadn't fully developed. But a heart murmur occurs whenever there is a malfunction in these valves. If they don't shut completely or they don't shut tightly, then you can, whenever the heart contracts, you'll have a backwards flow of blood, and it causes this shushing sound. So instead of being the la-dum, dum-dum, dum-dum, dum-dum sound that we know the heart sound like, we might hear dum-ch-dum-ch-dum-ch-dum. You know, you might have this flutter back. Usually heart murmurs are not too dangerous unless they become larger, and most of us grow out of them. The next thing I just wanted to show you is, a lot of diagrams that we have the arteries and veins and different things in blue and red. So what does the blue and the red represent? Now, the blue and the red does not represent the color of the blood. Don't think that is a misconception. All blood is red. The blue shows you when they have deoxygenated blood, and the red shows you when you have oxygenated blood. Now, there's another misconception too. A lot of times we say arteries, people will say they carry oxygenated blood, which is not true. Arteries actually carry blood away from the heart. There is the pulmonary artery, which carries blood to the lungs, and it actually has deoxygenated blood, and it is in blue. It's represented by number 2 on this chart. And then most time we'd say veins would carry deoxygenated blood, but that's not true either. Veins actually carry blood to the heart, and there's one vein in the body that carries oxygenated blood, and that's the pulmonary vein, which is represented here by number 4. So, just kind of keep this all in mind. That's a circuit, and it works very efficiently, and thank goodness it does. Anyway, I hope this helps you understand circulation a little bit, guys, and I will talk to you very, very soon.